It's 11:51 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. PMQs on the way at 12 and after that I'm not quite sure what we'll do. So the Wednesdays are a little bit of a mixed bag at the moment. It's not, by the way, cast in stone that we will continue to take PMQs live forever. It was a relatively recent revision of the programme. Always happy to turn on a sixpence here, as you know, but for the time being, with the virus, the pandemic still sweeping the islands, and of course with the project here on the horizon, not just on the horizon, is it? It's arriving. I'm minded, at least for the time being, not least because it gives us an opportunity to do this even more frequently than we would be able to do otherwise. Summon the Usherwood. Theo Usherwood is here.
I have this knee-jerk reaction where I sort of nod my head and start no, I don't run. I'm as if I'm on a horse bouncing up and down into the studio.
Do you need the Monty Python coconuts?
Another difficult week for Keir Starmer again this week because, of course,
insofar as knowing where to start, it's a difficult.
Exactly.
Week,
yes. I mean, there's obviously Brexit. Keir Starmer, I don't think, has used Brexit. I'm trying to think back to all of the PMQs I've covered since he's become leader of the Labour Party. He hasn't gone in on Brexit once.
No.
Since he took over from Jeremy Corbyn. Of course, it was a staple for the former Labour leader against Theresa May. Keir Starmer, though, this would be the time to bring it up, not least because of Michael Gove, the Cabinet Office Minister, admitting this morning that actually EU officials were going to be hot desking in a UK government building in Northern Ireland to make sure supervising British officials,
UK officials
at the 4 different main ports
just say
in
that
Northern
again,
Ireland. So EU officials will be working in UK government buildings
in a supervisory role
in Northern Ireland
on UK soil,
visiting.
It's like George and Andrew have got back together.
Visiting the 4 major ports in Northern Ireland to make sure that goods arriving did not breach EU single market rules and pay the correct customs.
Do you know, arguably it's even worse news for any remaining Brexiters when it is translated into Daily Mailese. Do you want to, shall I translate what you've just said into Daily Mailese?
What is it?
Brussels will be allowed to have its officials permanently based in Northern Ireland to oversee checks on goods crossing the Irish Sea. That's so bizarre, because Ian Duncan Smith swore blind there were some really easy technological solutions to all these problems. And I'm sure that the J-Dog said on this programme that all the talk of... I think he accused me of not understanding what was going on. Bless his little cashmere socks.
2 points to make on that is that, firstly, it won't be a mini EU embassy. So they're going to be working in UK government buildings. Secondly, as Michael Gove pointed out today, they will be able to access UK databases. So if they want to do remote working, James, and find out the details of goods arriving in Northern Ireland, they can do so remotely from Brussels. The other point to make, and this is something that we expect to come up with Michael Gove at 12:30 when he gives a statement to the House of Commons, is there has been a government win on goods leaving Northern Ireland for mainland Great Britain.
So you couldn't call that a win. Are you working for them now?
No, I mean that was contained in one of the clauses of the internal market bill.
It's going to be better than things currently are, is it?
Well, that was the point. That was one of the clauses.
Answer the question. Is it going to be better than things currently are?
No,
it's not a win then. Carry on.
Well, it's better than. I mean,
it's less bad than they could have been.
The point was, James, that when the government published the internal market bill, one of the offending clauses which broke the withdrawal agreement in their internal market bill was the fact that the government wanted to remove checks on goods from Northern Ireland to mainland Great Britain.
Yes,
and that appears to have been one of the concessions in that meeting with Maros Sefcovic, the Vice President of the European Commission, that Michael Gove has secured, compared to what was previously went before.
Yes, but not the other way, of course.
No, not the other way, because you've got the EU officials who are there supervising
Which
UK
is what he swore blind. Boris Johnson swore blind in Northern Ireland that what is now happening wouldn't happen. And when he was filmed that time in his cups, or at least holding a glass. And you also have the pledge from Michael Gove not long ago that this would never happen. They wouldn't climb down on any of this for the stuff in the internal markets. But even some people claiming he sort of made it look like a resignation issue. But here we are. That does, to be fair to Theo Usherwood, for people who don't follow Brexit as closely as we do, in the context of Brexit, something staying exactly as it currently is a win.
Yes, that would be fair. That would be fair, James. So the reason I bring this up, of course, is because Keir Starmer might want to press Boris Johnson on the particular arrangements.
So interesting, isn't it?
But he won't, because of course Labour still can't say which way they're going to vote. The Labour leader can't say which way Labour are going to vote when it comes to a vote on the trade deal, if a trade deal does indeed come back. The best option for Keir Starmer in that scenario would be
fascinating to me.
A trade deal would come back from Boris Johnson. The Brexit MPs, people like Peter Bone, Andrew Bridgen, they would say, and the DUP would say...
the Brains Trust, I think they're known as.
They would say that Boris Johnson has caved in. The alternative would be a no-deal Brexit, and therefore Keir Starmer would be able to say to his Remain MPs, you need to vote for this.
Yes.
And then he would also have the double win of Boris Johnson or whoever's the Conservative Party leader at the next election not being able to say, you didn't vote for our Brexit, because Labour would have voted for their Conservative Party's trade deal.
Right.
So what I'm saying is that at the moment, Keir Starmer can't yet talk about Brexit. I got
distracted. I checked with Keith whether or not we had the interim wipe-down clip ready. I should have been concentrating more on what our political editor was talking about instead of my ludicrous little comic interludes. Go on, run that by us again, because we are waiting for PMQs to get started.
I don't think Keir Starmer's going to bring up Brexit, because I don't think Keir Starmer can bring up Brexit until he's voted and until he's made a decision about whether Labour is going to vote for the trade deal that Boris Johnson does or may not bring back from Brussels. And I was just painting a scenario.
You're not allowed to have opinions, are you? Because I'm fascinated by I don't know what he's supposed to do, and I'm wary of people who are certain. I mean, as ever, it's that Yeats poem, isn't it, about the worst are full of passionate certainty. But the thing is, this is what was always going to happen. This is, when Project Fear becomes Project Here, and I fully appreciate plenty of perfectly decent people didn't understand or realise that was inevitable. I got no beef with them. Contempt for the con and compassion for the con. Unfortunately, the con are still at it, as you've just reminded us. But when it settles completely, Starmer will be able to make hay out of how awful it is and argue that he never wanted it. But until it settles completely, he remains very vulnerable to the accusation that you don't want it and you are frustrating it. And that is a real conundrum, because just this story today about Ineos, the Jim Ratcliffe, here's another headline, another intro paragraph that sums up the whole situation. Billionaire Sir Jim Ratcliffe, who is a very, very prominent Brexiter. They're very short of prominent business people to come out in favour of it, has now announced that a vehicle he was due to build in Bridgend in Wales, he's going to build in France. Ho-hum. So when it starts happening, when this becomes, an almost daily occurrence, there's no harm whatsoever politically in Starmer being perceived as someone who didn't want Brexit to happen. But there still is harm in that today.
I think the other thing that may happen or may transpire is that actually the whole thing becomes mixed up in the recovery from the pandemic.
Yes.
And so that Keir Starmer, if he was to...
But that's not going to work on not opening a 4x4 factory, is no one, because the pandemic's been in France as well.
Quite a lot's worked before.
Yes, but the pandemic has been in France as well, so you can't... Jim Ratcliffe can't come around and say, it's that pandemic, so I'm opening a factory in France. It's pure Brexit.
Yes, I take the point. The other question, of course, is that if there is a trade deal and an agreement is reached, then Boris Johnson passes it through the House of Commons, then there is, of course, a chance that the disruption will be minimised to a certain extent, and that actually life will continue relatively similar to what has been before.
And that would almost be a win. A more similar life is to what we had up until Brexit kicking
but just in terms of the trade between the UK and between Britain and Great Mainland Britain.
What Starmer does is not obvious. It is not a clear path.
But that's why he needs to wait.
It's so interesting, and that may be why the decision, if he were to take it this time next year, it would be a very different decision from if he has to take it before Christmas this year. If there is a deal, his best case scenario, no deal, because then he can attack it from the very start with full throat and evidence, and of course his background.
There is another argument to be put forward in terms of, from Boris Johnson's point of view, in terms of the fate in terms of what is in favour of a no deal, and that's firstly, of course, it placates his backbenchers.
He doesn't have to write it down.
And he doesn't. And the second thing is, of course, that if there is a no deal, then it will be possible to break with EU rules and regulations.
Unless we want to sell stuff there.
Yeah, that's the problem.
I love you, mate.
But I'm trying.
Can I just explain to people how good Theo Usherwood is at his job? Because he pursues a position of complete impartiality, and that is necessary. You know, luckily I don't have to get somebody onto this program like the BBC had John Shirley on the other night, our friend with the haulage company, the freight forwarding company down in Dover, and they still feel compelled to get Peter Bone on to almost contradict what John is saying. John runs a massive freight forwarding company down in Dover. You've heard him on this programme many times. Peter Bone knows nothing. And the BBC still has to do that. Theo provides a corrective to my position, because it is obviously important to remember that some interpretations can be omitted by the depth of my certainty.
So all I was going to say, thank you, Jess. All I was going to say was that if there is a no-deal Brexit, we wouldn't be tied to EU rules and regulations. Of course, the EU constitutes 40% of where we trade. We are only 8% of the trade for the European Union. But if we are able to break with EU rules and regulations, you could, Boris Johnson, potentially pursue a scenario where we can make the mainland Great Britain, not the UK because Northern Ireland's outside of it, mainland Great Britain more attractive to international firms from America, Brazil, China and so forth. But of course, that would mean reducing our consumer protections, our environmental protections, our labour laws. Then we get to
have to get our ports working as well. Although, to support Theo's suggestion of a glittering future, we must remember that Daniel Kawczynski, the MP for Shrewsbury, is now our official trade envoy to Mongolia. So the future is bright. But the future is Mongolian.
But the counter argument to that is that if we tie ourselves, in some respect, to EU rules and regulations, and you are the likes of Jim Ratcliffe, and you can be based in a market of 500 million people, or you can be based in a market of 600 million people, which one would you choose?
60 million.
60, sorry.
We're a double act. You know,
sorry. Thank you for saving me on that one.
6 million wise. I'm Eric Morecambe. He's playing all the right notes, not necessarily
60 million.
And that is not an opinion, you see, from Theo. That's just counting. Here's Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I join with the Prime Minister in his comments about the vaccine rollout? It was fantastic to see the first person, Margaret Keenan, receive the vaccine yesterday. It's a huge national effort, and I want to thank everybody who's been involved with it. Mr. Speaker, can I also thank you and the House authorities for enabling me to participate today, notwithstanding the fact that I'm self-isolating. Mr. Speaker, a year ago, the Prime Minister stood on the steps of Downing Street and promised the country, these were his words, a permanent break from talking about Brexit. Can the Prime Minister tell us, how's that going?
I'm delighted to welcome the right honourable gentleman from his vantage point of exile in Islington, and wish him all his spiritual home, and wish him all the best in his self-isolation. But I can tell him that his own silence on this matter has been sphinx-like. I think
Boris Johnson, of course, lived in Islington until he left his wife, who was being treated for cancer at the time.
For so long. We delivered Brexit, Mr. Speaker, on January the 31st, in case he failed to notice.
Going back to Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, it's Camden, not Islington. Camden. And the Prime Minister starts straight away by deflecting. Same old, whether it's COVID or Brexit. 12 months ago, he told the British people that he had an oven-ready deal. He didn't say he had half a deal. He didn't say the next stage will be very, very difficult. In fact, he told the British people, this was before the election, he faced them and he told them, these were his words, that the chances of no deal were absolutely zero. And the now Chancellor obviously took him at his word, because the Chancellor said in the run-up to the election, we won't need to plan for no deal because we have a deal. So a year on, why should anyone who trusted the Prime Minister when he said he had a deal, including his Chancellor apparently, believe a word that he says now?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I hesitate to accuse the right honourable gentleman of deliberately trying to mislead people, but let's be in no doubt that we had an oven-ready deal, which was the withdrawal agreement, by which the people voted for, as he rightly points out, by which this country left the customs union, left the single market, and delivered
less than a year after passing that withdrawal agreement or oven-ready deal, Boris Johnson's Conservative Party passed legislation allowing them to break international law and abandon the pledges made in that treaty.
Immigration system, which we have put into law in fulfilment of our manifesto commitment. We'll be able to get on with instituting free ports, low-tax free ports in places where jobs and growth are most needed around the country. We'll be able to honour our promise to the British people and institute higher animal welfare standards, and we'll be able to do free trade deals, and we'll get our money back as well, Mr. Speaker. I don't know what else he wants to see from January the 1st, but all those things will be delivered.
Returning to Camden with Keir Starmer.
I see, Mr. Speaker, apparently get Brexit done just meant the first part of it, the easy bit. I don't remember that being written on the bulldozer at the time. Mr. Speaker, last September, the Prime Minister actually hit the nail on the head when he said that leaving without a deal would be, in his words, a failure of statecraft. It would. It would be a total failure. And it will be the British people who pay the price. Does the Prime Minister agree with his own spending watchdog, the OBR, that the cost of that failure, of leaving the EU with no deal, would be higher unemployment, higher inflation, and a smaller economy?
Mr. Speaker, the more he talks about Brexit, the more I can see why he tried to avoid the subject for the last for the last year. We did leave with a very good deal, and under any circumstances, this country will
again the deal he describes. He felt the need to pass legislation allowing him to break it before a year had passed after signing. These things matter, surely.
Consequences for this country of a deal on Australian terms, which I think is what he's talking about. We have yet to hear from the Labour Party what their view is of that matter. Would they vote for it? Yes or no? I mean, he remained totally Delphic last week, Mr. Speaker, about his policy on fighting coronavirus. He's totally Delphic about what to do on Brexit as well.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister talks about indecision. He's absolutely stuck. This is the truth of it. He's absolutely stuck and dithering between the deal he knows that we need and the compromise he knows his backbenchers won't let him do. Mr. Speaker, I genuinely hope this is the usual Prime Minister's bluster, and that, like one of his newspaper columns, a deal arrives at the last minute. But for some people and their jobs, it's already too late. Yesterday, Ineos, a major employer in this country, announced that they will not now build a new Grenadier car in Bridgend and will move production to France instead. This is a project that just 2 months ago, the Prime Minister said was a vote of confidence. So hundreds of skilled jobs now won't go to Bridgend. Can the Prime Minister tell us how many more British jobs have to go overseas before he gets on with delivering the Brexit deal that he promised?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think it's a bit much of the Leader of the Opposition to criticise the government for failure to come up with a policy on Brexit when he can't even, and a bit much for him to attack the putative consequences of coming out on Australian terms, when he can't even say whether he would vote for that deal, yes or no. If he can't say whether he would vote for our deal, yes or no, then he can't. Then I'm afraid, Mr. Speaker, he simply cannot attack the government's policy. Until he is able to come up with a position of his own, Mr. Speaker, wrap a towel round his head, decide what he actually thinks, I find it very difficult to take his criticisms seriously. But what I can say is that this country will be ready for whether we have a Canadian or an Australian.
The Prime Minister seems to be accusing the Leader of the Opposition of not saying whether he would sign a deal that doesn't currently exist.
Not just in spite of Brexit, but because of Brexit. Because this country is going to become a magnet for overseas investment. Indeed, it already is and will remain so.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister asked me how I'll vote on a deal that he hasn't even secured. Secure the deal, Prime Minister. You promised it. And I can say this, Mr. Speaker, if there is a deal, and I hope there's a deal, then my party will vote in the national interest, not on party political lines, as he is doing. Mr. Speaker, this is about leadership. The Prime Minister has done 15 U-turns. He's had 5 different plans on Brexit or on COVID. And last week, 53 of his own MPs voted against it. So if I were him, I wouldn't talk about leadership. The Prime Minister hasn't always wanted to listen to business. We know what his message to business is. But he should listen to them. Let me quote the CBI. They say the message for business is this: get a deal quickly. Then there's the National Farmers Union. Time is running out, they say. It's very hard to get the final preparations. These are the people the Prime Minister should be listening to, not his backbenchers. And on the question of preparation, the government knew months ago that it needed 50,000 customs agents trained and ready to go from the 1st of January, deal or no deal. So can the Prime Minister tell the House how many of the 50,000 agents will be in place on the 1st of January? That's 23 days' time.
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's wonderful to get the end of that question. I can tell him that we've invested £1 billion already in getting this country ready for whatever the trading relationship is that we have on January the 1st, and 84 million into supporting customs agents across the UK, 200 million into supporting our ports, and they're doing an amazing. And I want to thank business for the incredible job they're doing of getting ready. We've all got to get ready, because under any view, there is going to be change from January the 1st. There will be a change in the way we do business. There will be more opportunities for this country around the world. And I'm delighted by
the question, of course, asked how many customs officers have been hired.
From Camden. I apologise, Mr. Speaker. The message from Camden seems to be that actually, given the choice, the right honourable gentleman would vote for a deal rather than not. Did you get that impression? I think I did.
Hopefully we can have the final question a little shorter. Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, I take it that the answer is the Prime Minister's no idea whether the 50,000 customs agents will be in place on the 1st of January. He either doesn't know or he doesn't care. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister said he had a deal. He didn't. He said he would protect jobs. He didn't. He said he'd prepare for any outcome. He hasn't. And whatever may happen in the next few days, there's no doubting that his incompetence has held Britain back. So will he end this charade, end the uncertainty, get the deal that he promised, and allow the country to move on?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the right honourable gentleman for his final baffling question. Last week, he, as I say, Sphinx-like, avoided any pronouncement on how this country was going to fight COVID. He refused to support the measures that we have put in place. This week, he remains deafeningly silent on what he really thinks about a Brexit deal. While he puts a cold towel round his head, Mr. Speaker, lost in thought, tries to work out what his position is, we are getting on
To order. Mr. Bryant. Mr. Bryant. I suggest the whip goes and has a word with him. We're not having that disgraceful behaviour. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think you should summon him back. He seems to have vanished. But while the right honourable gentleman tries to work out what his position is, we're getting on with the work of of government. And it's, as he says, it's a year since his People's Government was elected, and I'm very proud that we're delivering on the people's priorities. 6,000 of the 20,000 police officers, Mr. Speaker, 14,800 of the 50,000 nurses already, and we're getting on with building every one of the 40 hospitals, in fact 48 hospitals, that we're going to deliver, along with the biggest programme of infrastructure investment in this country for a century, uniting and levelling up across the whole of the UK. And whether the outcome is Canada or whether it's Australia, Mr. Speaker, we will be taking back control. And we have already taken back control of our money, our borders and our laws, and we will seize all the opportunities that Brexit brings.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today is Coronation Street's 60th anniversary. It's the world's longest-running TV drama serial. This is an amazing landmark, so congratulations to it. But sometimes it feels we've been discussing infrastructure in the north almost as long. However, we've had the Oakview report recommending the government committed to HS2 and its full Y-shaped network serving both sides of the Pennines. We've had the positive decision to proceed with it. So as the plans for the eastern leg of HS2 Phase 2B are developed, will my right honourable friend consider starting construction from the north? That will be good for jobs in the north, connectivity with the East Midlands, and all of which, of course, drive my right honourable friend's levelling up agenda.
My honourable friend is a big expert in this field and a great campaigner for transport, and he's right about the massive impact that these programmes can have on jobs. And he said, "I'm sorry,
Mr. Bryant, I think we need this conversation later. Fine, Prime Minister."
Yes, well, I was saying, Mr. Speaker, that my honourable friend is completely right about the power of great infrastructure projects to deliver jobs, and that's why we're getting on with the eastern leg
I'm not sure what Chris Bryant
of HS2 and with Northern
is being accused of having done, but we will find out.
What I've asked the National Infrastructure Commission and Network Rail to look at is how those two projects can best be integrated to boost the economy of the whole of the north of the country.
Let's head up to Scotland to the leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, by this government's own admission, it was confirmed that Northern Ireland is getting the best of both worlds, access to the EU's single market and customs union. This is great news for businesses in Northern Ireland, but it leaves Scotland, who also voted to remain, dealing with the hardest of Brexits. What is good for Northern Ireland, Mr. Speaker, is surely good enough for Scotland. Why is Scotland being shafted by this double dealing? Can the Prime Minister explain to Scottish businesses why this is fair?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, in common with the whole of the rest of the United Kingdom, Scotland will benefit from the substantial access of devolved powers for Scotland, and will benefit from the regaining of money, borders and laws. And as I never tire of telling my friend, the gentleman opposite, in spite of all his jeering, Mr. Speaker, Scotland will take back control of colossal quantities of fish, which I think is something that the people of Scotland deserve to be able to exploit for the advantage of those communities.
Ian Blackford, second question.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister can spin all he likes, but everyone can now see the total contempt this UK government holds for Scottish interests. Northern Ireland gets the single market and customs union. We get nothing. Members of his Scottish branch office told him how unfair and damaging it would be to deny Scotland's access to the EU single market and customs union, whilst at the same time delivering it for Northern Ireland. Ruth Davidson even said that such an act would undermine the integrity of the United Kingdom. The former Scottish Tory Constitution spokesperson said it would be the end of the union. They, along with the former Scottish Secretary, said that if this were to happen, they would all resign. So, Mr. Speaker, since the Prime Minister is ready to sell out Scotland's interests with his Brexit deal, does he expect to receive these resignation letters from Baroness Davidson or her cohorts before or after he travels to Brussels tonight?
Well, I think, Mr. Speaker, the only reasonable answer to that question is I think it's highly unlikely that those letters will arrive. And I think he does gross injustice to Scotland, to the future of Scotland, which will be assured within the single market of the United Kingdom. And I believe, in spite of the slight negativity I detect from him, I believe Scotland, as long with the rest of the UK, will benefit from a very strong trading relationship with our friends and partners across the Channel, whatever the circumstances, whatever the terms we reach tonight.
Julie Malson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am supporting Turn on the Subtitles, a campaign being led by my Bishop Stortford constituent, Henry Warren. There is a wealth of evidence that default same-language subtitling can have a dramatic effect on children's literacy, particularly for disadvantaged children, which I know is a great priority for my right honourable friend, given the potential impact of COVID on the attainment gap. Will the Prime Minister support a government consultation to turn on the
sounds like an excellent campaign. It's Julie Marson, the Conservative MP for Hertford and Stortford, as she mentioned. Keep an eye on that. Theo, we'll keep an ear across events, or at least return retrospectively. Do we know what Chris Bryant is alleged to have done?
We still don't know what Chris Bryant did.
Because Lindsay Hoyle doesn't usually display that much emotion. He was cross, wasn't he?
So, yes, he was very cross. Chris Bryant, from what I could see on the television pictures, left through one of the voting lobby doors at the very back of the Labour benches, which are directly below the press gallery. So it's very difficult for journalists who are actually in the House of Commons to see what happened. The Labour whip, or a Labour whip, then obviously went to find Chris Bryant and bring him back to the House of Commons to say, to
the Speaker, the headmaster wants to see you.
The headmaster wants to see you.
Yes.
And then the Speaker turned around and said, "Not now, go away," which you heard Sir Lindsay Hoyle rebuke Chris Bryant for a second time. That was because Chris Bryant came back into the chamber. But he obviously did something which caught the Speaker's eye from the very back of the Labour benches, one of the last
you think it'll be a gesture rather than something the Speaker could have heard?
Did or said something.
So if you had to speculate, I'd say he called him a liar, which speakers historically hate.
You can't, well, it's unparliamentary. You can't call...
precisely.
And that was why you'll notice when Boris Johnson came back at Keir Starmer about the oven-ready deal, he stopped short of accusing Keir Starmer of being disingenuous when Keir Starmer linked that oven-ready deal to the entirety of Brexit. Boris Johnson, and the line from the Conservative Party has been that the oven-ready deal only referred to the withdrawal agreement. You put it in the microwave and it goes poppity pig, and out it comes and Brexit's sorted. And of course, the complaint has been from the Labour benches, well, actually, and indeed Boris Johnson said it when it came, the withdrawal agreement bill came back for second reading, came to second reading when he'd won his majority in the House of Commons, that MPs just need to come back in the new year and finish the job. The insinuation being that actually...
Yes, they're both right. And technically, the manifesto pledge was solely to deliver a withdrawal agreement, but rhetorically, as they toured the country, the impression they very, very deliberately gave to voters was that this will all be finished by passing this bill. Of course, the future trading relationship that the United Kingdom has with its largest trading partners on the planet is, with 2.5 weeks to go, still very much up in the air. So they're both right on this. It's why it's such a dispiriting thing to observe. But the failure, or the inability of politicians to accuse each other of lying in the House of Commons is one of the reasons people find my commentary so helpful and valuable. If you don't like it, I urge you to listen to the LBC News, our sister station, who carry it in its entirety without my my occasional pearls of epic wisdom.
But the point about the oven-ready deal, James, was a way of winning over Remain voters who were just so fed up with all the talk about Brexit. They just wanted it over. Stop.
Even I could have been tempted for that if it was true. I'd have thought, well, all right, but I knew, of course, that it wasn't true.
We will make it stop. But, of course, the irony is that Boris Johnson needs to keep on talking about Brexit to keep his core vote going. So,
until it becomes real, which is, I think Starmer took us both by surprise today by going in so hard on it, and that's kind of what I was trying to explain when I talked about the dust settling and the point at which it will be a matter of pride to have not wanted it to happen is still some way off, but it's getting a hell of a lot closer.
Yes. The other aspect, of course, and this is something I know you've talked about repeatedly, James, is who gets the blame?
Repeatedly, yes.
Who gets the blame?
Hell yes.
So it's not necessarily a given that Brexit for Boris Johnson suddenly loses all usefulness if it all turns to dust and you see long queues, because there's the potential to point over there, as in over the channel, and say it's all your fault,
or it's all Remainers' fault. They've had a crack at that earlier this week. It hasn't landed yet, but I'm sure they'll come back to it and have another go. I fully expect to be held responsible for Brexit by the end of 2021. Personally responsible for Brexit.
But what Boris Johnson is trying to do in the Commons is to try and equate the Canada-style trade deal with the European Union and the Australia-style solution as equal. That if there was an old-fashioned weighing scales, you could put one on one side and the other on the other side, and it would come out about the same. And of course, the two are very different, because Canada has a free trade deal with the European Union, and Australia does not have a free trade deal with the European
But it does have trading agreements with lots of countries much, much closer to Australia, which is where the laws of gravity, as they are referred to actually in trade circles, come in. 3 questions have come in for one of us. Shall we have a go at them together?
Let's go.
This is from Keir McCandy, who's in Glasgow. He says, could somebody, perhaps the excellent Theo Usherwood, if not the excellent James O'Brien? Thanks a lot, mate. It's my show, Keir. All right. Please explain the following. Is it not the Speaker's role to ensure that the PM actually answers the questions put to him? Otherwise, Bourgeois could simply respond aubergines to every question and be done with it. Should not Keir Starmer be insisting that the Speaker compel Mr. Johnson to answer the question asked?
There is nothing that I'm aware of.
No, same here.
That forces the Speaker to dictate the way that questions are answered.
Do you know what you should have said then?
What?
Aubergines. Why does someone not take him up? This is someone I think is channeling. That's 1-1 now after Kerr gave you the nod. I think this one is an affectionate nod in my direction. Okay. Why does someone not take him up on the Australian terms nonsense?
Because you've... Oh, yes. I think actually... No,
well, who can? I mean, he can say it's the same answer, actually, aubergines.
The key difference in the words, of course, is arrangement solution for Australia versus deal for Canada.
Yeah.
And Boris Johnson is technically correct when he talks about an Australia-style arrangement or an Australia-style solution, and solution being the newer word that's sort of emerged from Number 10 speak in the last few days. He's technically correct, and there's nothing incorrect about what Boris Johnson is saying. But if you're listening to this and you're wondering,
except insofar as Australia is seeking quite enthusiastically a trading agreement with the European Union, so to suggest,
but that's an omission. I'm talking about the actual words that he's using.
Yeah, no, technically, you're quite right.
So technically, the Speaker can't turn around and say you're misleading the House there. Australia doesn't have a deal with the European Union, because Boris Johnson has said Australia, he's never said that Australia has a deal with the
We'll be like them in terms of our relationship with the European Union. So it's a euphemism for no deal. It would be just as intellectually rigorous to describe it as a Mongolian-style arrangement with the European Union. And that is, I think, the point.
And of course, I know I've used the term, and you've taken me to task.
I've merely demanded clarification. And finally, why is Boris Johnson, who last year put his Islington townhouse on sale for £3.75 million, mocking Keir Starmer, who lives in Camden, for having a spiritual home in Islington?
I think it has something to do with Boris Johnson, and this is something that has been used previously by others, of trying to portray the Labour leader as being part of an elite group of people who live in North London and are in the Labour Party.
So his neighbours, in other words, in his £3.75 million townhouse.
But I think the way the narrative goes, James, is that if you're the leader of the party which proclaims to be standing up for the working man in the north of England or in the Midlands, the men and women who go to work in...
You shouldn't live in Islington, which contains some of the poorest boroughs in the country.
I don't think that's the way that Islington is used in this particular terminology.
I think it's patience, the deepest reserves of patience Theo Usherwood is drawing on today. And for the record, I don't give a hoot how much his house costs, but it is customary in this country to always mention the value of the house in the British media when you are discussing wealthy families, with one incredible exception that it's taken me 25 years as an alleged journalist to notice. There is one wealthy family in this country who are routinely written about without any reference whatsoever to the cost of the monetary value of their homes. Can you think who it is? Can you think who it is? I'll tell you after the very latest news headlines with Thomas Watts. 25 minutes to 1 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where I'll tell you what happened if you fell for that hook and tease before the news there. If I am reeling you in with that revelation that they always add that even I, in the halcyon days of post-Brexit brutality, even the value of my house in Leafy Chiswick was alluded to in the Daily Mail after a former editor of The Sun, who seems, or at the time was somewhat obsessed with me, rang in the story, but of course I'm not supposed to know that. So everyone gets the value of their house mentioned. It doesn't matter whether you own it or not, because it's just the value of the house. And it occurred to me this morning when I was reading Sarah Vine, Michael Gove's wife's column in the Daily Mail, and she mentioned Harry and Meghan's £11 million Californian mansion. And I don't know if you get this. It's a bit like when you read detective fiction. Oh, I've got some big recommendations coming up for you as well on that. I've been inhaling books for the last couple of weeks, but one's not out until next year, but it might be the best historical crime fiction book I've ever read. And you know I've read a lot, but this one is an absolute peach. But I won't tell you about it too much until you can actually buy it. But quite often in crime fiction, and I read a lot. Oh, guess what I got? I got a signed Harlan Coben copy. I made friends with him on Twitter after telling you all to go out and buy his book, and he obviously saw it. It's a benefit of having a blue tick. If you don't know this, probably, if you've got a blue tick on Twitter, you can click on it and you only see communications from other blue ticks. It's why perhaps occasionally it seems that I may read out tweets from people, famous people, I suppose you could say it, a little bit more than non-famous people. It's only because it's a sort of edit function. So when I click on verified, all I see is tweets from other verified accounts. It's one rule for me, another rule for everybody else. Cheap shoes for peasants, metropolitan liberal elite. But I was reading this thing in the Mail today, because again, having defended Matt Hancock for 90 minutes, when I tell you there's a lot to enjoy in the Daily Mail, you're going to hate me even more. But I felt like Columbo, just one more thing. And I couldn't work out what it was that was bothering me about it. And remember, I've sort of been a journalist for 25 years. In the early years, I was doubling up as a suit salesman in a West End emporium, but give or take 2.5 decades. And I had never clocked before that every single wealthy family in the land has the value of their home stuck as a matter of course into any newspaper reports about them. And it's not even political. You're just as likely to see it in The Sun as you are in the Mirror, in the Mail. I don't know about the Guardian, actually, just off the top of my head. I'd have to double check. But you know I'm right, don't you? And I just noticed it today, because I don't really care how much Boris Johnson's £3.7 million Islington townhouses work. But if you're going to suggest that Keir Starmer is somehow out of touch because he lives in Islington when he doesn't, and you until quite recently did live in a house in Islington worth just shy of £4 million, there seems to be a hypocrisy there that actually does merit mention of the house's value. You may disagree, that's fine. You may think it's very important for Peter Mackay in the Daily Mail a few years ago to mention the value of my Chiswick Palace stroke mansion stroke folly. But I just had this little niggling thought in the back of my mind. I was thinking, what is it? And I suddenly realised they never mention his grand's house. Now, I always forget what the precise details are of what the royal family do and do not own and what belongs to the nation. But as I say, that doesn't matter, because for newspaper article purposes, and I know this because I used to write them, it's just the fact that they live in there. So Prince Harry and Meghan live in an £11 million Californian mansion. And I am going to look out for the next time that Sarah Vine in the Daily Mail mentions that the Queen lives in a £5 billion, 240-bedroom palace in the swanky borough of Westminster. Because otherwise, there's something a bit odd going on there, isn't there? If it really, really matters when you're writing negative stuff about Prince Harry and his mixed-race wife, but you never go near the same sort of detail and information when you're writing about his gran, that's just a bit odd. I don't know what the rationale for that would be? I shall leave you to ponder it. But there you go. That's today's little nugget of knowledge. And I need to apologise as well, because I shouldn't really have done that. We haven't got enough time left to launch a new topic. But I'm going to do this without a lengthy introduction. In fact, if you ring in now, you will almost immediately get on air, because the question is a really, really interesting one. And it is based entirely on what you just heard in PMQs. Has Keir Starmer got it right? Confirming there, I think beyond doubt, that if any sort of deal is achieved in the next few days by Boris Johnson and the Brexit negotiators, then Keir Starmer will support it. And his explanation, I thought, was crystal clear. It's the national interest. If there is a chance, and I think Theo suggested earlier that there would be a chance, if Labour were to abstain, then the Tory backbenchers, who, I mean, understand nothing about anything, they might actually defeat it. I don't know what the exact numbers are, and I may have misinterpreted Theo, but I think there is a possibility that people like Bone and Bridgen and all the rest of them might scupper the deal, that if he's got any conscience whatsoever or any interest in the national interest, he will sign to get it through Parliament. It's possible he'd have to rely on Labour. But Labour's choice, it seems to me, is clear. It's a choice between the rubbish deal that's the best we can hope for, or the even greater catastrophe of no deal. So, having really not covered myself in glory today with my political affiliations or my attempts to defend political figures, I'll go all in on saying I think that, well, no, I won't go all in, but I think Starmer, caught between a rock and a hard place and compelled to choose a rock or a hard place. Actually, I'm going to slightly paraphrase that. It's a rock or a harder place. I think he has to support whatever deal Johnson can secure, with the constant caveat that he doesn't think we should ever have come to this point at all. And I'm going to throw open the phone lines and take as many contributions as I can on this between now and Sheila Fogarty's arrival in the studio shortly before 1 o'clock. The number you need, as always, is 0345 6060 973. Starmer seemed to categorically confirm that if Johnson secures a deal, and my other reading, by the way, between the lines of PMQs, was that Starmer doesn't think we're going to. Starmer seemed to me to be laying the ground for a no deal in some of his questions. But again, I'm just one pair of ears, and I often get things wrong. Except with regard to Brexit, actually, for the record, where I've got absolutely everything right since the very beginning of this mess. What do you reckon? Should Starmer back whatever deal Johnson can secure? My feeling is yes, because it has to be better than no deal. That was the great lie, of course, of the last few years, was that no deal is better than a bad deal. The worst deal in the world is better than no deal. Johnson knows that. Starmer knows that. You might not know that, and I might be wrong about that, in which case, all the more reasons to call me. Let's go to Chris, who's in Tower Hamlets. Chris, what do you reckon?
Good morning, James. Well, I reckon that if your analysis of what he said this morning is right, then you are right, and he would be right to do that. But I need to listen to the exchange again to be sure that I didn't hear.
Well, let me tell you, Chris, in Tower Hamlets, that the bits of PMQs that you can't hear when Theo and I discussed it, we were both certain that he said he would support any deal.
Can I just say, James, what I mean by that is I heard him say, get a deal, and we will vote in the national interest. I didn't hear him say the words, we will vote for it in the national interest.
Oh, you might be right. No, you might be right, actually. So, but can you imagine a deal that would not be in the national interest if the only other alternative was no deal?
No, I absolutely can't, and that's why I say that's why I agree with what you're saying about it now. But I think it's really important. I mean, Keir Starmer is not a man who doesn't choose his words really carefully, unlike the man opposite him.
Arguably too carefully sometimes, I think, given the the cut and thrust of parliamentary debate.
Yeah, possibly, but still, I think on something like this, it's important to get it right. You know, he can't. I mean, if he stood up and said, "Get a deal, no matter what it is, we'll vote for it." I mean, what would the headlines be then? We all know what they'd be. You know.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. So, I mean, in the event of a deal that is, and I can't quite conceive of any circumstances in which the deal wouldn't be better than no deal, but once it is established, once it is done, you would support Keir Starmer supporting it.
I would. I mean, I wish there was some way in which, the Labour Party could simply abstain. But the problem with that is that they would just abstain, and nobody would want to listen to their explanation of why they were abstaining. They would just simply say,
no.
I mean, Johnson would say, you're running away, can't make your mind up, all the rest of it. Whereas I think it's perfectly legitimate to say, look, it's your deal. We won't oppose it. So that you've got the deal you wanted. Now prove that this is a good deal. Now prove that this isn't disastrous for our country.
But it's less disastrous than all the other options. That's why I find this so fascinating politically. And I misspoke, actually. You've just reminded me. It's not abstentions, of course, that would open the door to the possibility of Tory backbenchers undermining Labour would have to vote against it.
Yeah, well, I mean, and that's a very difficult option, obviously,
because then they stand accused of having scuppered Brexit. Whatever happens, it'll be their fault. So I find it so interesting. Chris, thank you. Clarify that with Theo, can we? And actually see whether or not we got any more news on what I know. It's more gossip than. It's more gravy than meat and potatoes, but I still would quite like to know what Chris Bryant has done that upset Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker, so much. And we can just double check on whether or not we did come away from that thinking that Keir Starmer had sort of pledged to support any deal that Boris Johnson secured. Chris has given me pause for thought. It's 12:46. It's nothing if not a community effort, this programme, is it? So I think the general consensus is that Chris heard correctly, and I possibly jumped the gun by suggesting that Keir Starmer had pledged to support any deal that Boris Johnson brings back. And of course that makes perfect sense because, as I said in my commentary, over the top of PMQs, the idea that Keir Starmer can actually pledge to sign a deal that doesn't currently exist is ridiculous. So he said, I will back whatever is in the national interest. Thank you, Chris. I think, Chris, I hope I'm not doing him a terrible disservice now, but I think he used to be a headmaster, if I recall previous calls that he's put into the programme. So I probably should have just accepted his word for it in the first place. So I think, however, we both agreed that it's impossible at the moment to conceive of any deal that would not be demonstrably superior to no deal. This again is something that we expect. Actually, Keith, give the tin a shout, will you? Because I'm going to put in another one. Can we get a sound effect for this tomorrow, like a cha-ching type noise? So for every time I say I told you so, and it goes cha-ching, and I give £10 to Hospice UK because I told you so several times that the phrase no deal is better than a bad deal was one of the biggest Brexit lies of all. So I don't think any of us, in seriousness, and you could do it for comedy value, are going to come up with a deal that would be worse than no deal. So Starmer will sign it, will vote for it. He won't abstain. He certainly won't vote against it. What do we think of that? Peter's in Croydon. Peter, what do you reckon?
Hi, James. Nice to speak to you.
Likewise.
I think it'd be a really big mistake to vote for the deal, no matter what the deal is. I think they should abstain, because I've seen it. I've been campaign with Labour before, and I see how the Tories blame Labour for the slightest thing, even if it's right or wrong. And I think if Labour vote for the deal, then their paw prints will be all over it as much as the Tories, and everything that goes wrong in the next few years, they won't be able to scrutinise the Tory deal on it because
they'll say, well, you voted for it. And there goes my pendulum, Pete. Seriously, my pendulum's just swung away again. And you've reminded me that I had a disagreement. I'm not name-dropping. I just think that Alistair Campbell's quite an interesting character to cite in this context because he's where you are. And I said that the Tories all voted for the Iraq War, and it's not as if they ever get reminded or hit over the head with that. And if anyone's...
to the media, isn't it?
Well, as Alistair said, if anyone's qualified to comment on that particular episode in British history, it's Alistair Campbell. And he said, you're mistaking the... you're falling into the trap of thinking that both parties get treated the same by A, the media, as you point out, but also B, by each other,
Yeah, totally. And I just cannot see it going any other way. If Labour sign that deal, then they cannot scrutinise anything the Tories do regarding Brexit over the next 5, 10, however many years. I really believe that. I also am already campaigning to rejoin.
Well, good luck with that. I think I need a bit of a breather first, but
you'll come with us. You'll come with us eventually.
Well, of course I will. Eventually, everybody will. Eventually, except probably Peter Bone and Andrew Bridgen, John Redwoody and Duncan Smith and Mark Francois. But the rest of us, the penny will drop. It's just a question of when, not if. However, I'm not jumping in your boat yet, but you make a very powerful point. The problem is that legislating for what will happen in the future and how the media will respond, while important, isn't necessarily Keir Starmer's style. I genuinely don't know. Peter, look after yourself. Take care. Joe's in Tunbridge Wells. Joe, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, Jane.
Now I'm wavering in the light of Pete's contribution, but what I was going to say to you was, yes, I think Keir Starmer should support it, because in the national interest, I can't think of any deal that could possibly be worse for the country. But more to the point, you were saying yesterday about option one, that Boris probably wouldn't go for that because his backbenchers will then go for his blood.
Yes.
I'm sure I've read that he's already thinking of resigning because he can't live on the salary, and I think he will come up with a deal, he will fudge the compromises, how they're presented, and then he'll say he's done his job, he's delivered Brexit, and go out in a blaze of glory.
Oh, without any comebacks or scrutiny, and he'll be busy.
Yes, he can turn his back on the whole thing.
That's quite an interesting thought. And the reason that Peter gave you pause was because it's very easy to believe that whatever happens next, the Conservative Party will say, every time the Labour Party point out things like the Ineos factory not being in Britain, they'll say, well, you voted for it. You voted for it. Best thing for Starmer then politically is no deal, but that's categorically against the national interest, as he knows better than anybody.
Yeah, and I think he will go for the national interest.
And that would involve supporting the deal and sucking it up when they come around and say, well, you voted for it. Because all you do, and you come back and say, well, I only voted for it because the choice was between your rubbish deal or no deal at all, which would have been even worse.
Yeah.
So maybe he could diffuse that quite easily.
Yeah, and I think another prediction, in 5 years' time, we will be clamouring to get back in the EU.
Well, 5 years, who knows? I'm not. You're both trying to tempt me into this rejoin camp at the moment. Obviously, I'm in it spiritually and politically and indeed ideologically, but I'm not in it yet urgently because I just wait for the dust to settle. 12:56 is the time. Miles is in Brighton. Miles, what do you think?
I think that he should give free vote to the MPs.
Do you?
Let them work on with their conscience. And the country's so split anyway. People have different views. And he gets him off the hook as well for having to be nailed to one position or the other.
It doesn't though, really, does it? I mean, it exposes him to accusations of dithering and not taking leadership, not providing leadership.
Well, I don't know. I don't think that's not leadership. It's one of the most important votes we're going to have.
Yes.
So why not let the MPs make their decision? They're the ones voted in. They know what their constituents want, and in different areas they want different things.
Yeah, but wanting things and things being true, if Brexit has proved anything to us over the last few years, Miles, it's that you can get a majority. If I got a 52% majority to vote that the moon is made of cheese, the moon would not suddenly turn into cheese, my friend.
Maybe, but I mean...
No, I promise you that's not a maybe.
Yeah.
But it is Brexit in the proverbial nutshell. A free vote, I don't think it's going to happen, but I can see the reasoning behind it. George is in Islington. Are you in a £3.7 million townhouse, George?
I'm sorry, sadly not.
Carry on. I thought that's all there were in Islington. What would you like to say?
Well, I do think that the Labour Party and the National Interest would have to support a deal if he gets one.
Yeah.
But I do also think that they ought to do so in a way that indicates, say, that they're visibly not behind it. I think a rather graceful solution would be to go through the lobby holding their nose.
I think, yes, I like that a lot. And because actually, problem is, though, they're such hypocrites, aren't they? And legacy media would pretend to be outraged by the disrespect. But that would be lovely. So we have no choice but to vote for this, because you've led us into such a pretty pickle that it's a rock or a harder place. So we're going to vote for the rock.
Precisely.
I mean, hold your nose
I
in the
think
lobby.
later it would be more difficult, wouldn't it, for this to be held up against them?
Yes, although who knows, as quite a few people have pointed out, and the point that Alistair Campbell made to me a couple of weeks ago, the first time I saw it, which was it's very naive of me to think that, you know, the Labour would be treated the same as the Tories for supporting the Iraq war if they were to support a Brexit that turned out to be awful. But you never, ever, ever, ever hear anybody pointing that out, do you? Thank you, George. That's it for another day. What a lovely show. Thank you for keeping me company once again. We shall do it again if you want tomorrow from 10. Meanwhile, here's Sheila Fogarty.